This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Killing Europe. Our guest this evening, filmmaker Michael Hansen, and his new film is Killing Europe. Michael, welcome to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Michael, I watched your film last night. Really scary stuff. We've got a lot to discuss, including the censorship of it. But let's first begin. Tell our audience about your film.
Well, basically, the film is a project that I started because I started seeing, news coming out of Europe that I didn't quite understand, and all the terrorist attacks and what have you not. And I started hearing these terms such as no-go zones and rape epidemic and so forth. And basically, I decided to go back to Denmark, which I left 15 years ago, roughly by now, and see with my own eyes. And I brought a camera, and I got a few interviews, and before you knew it, I was traveling through Europe, and I was making a movie. And I didn't even plan on it.
Thank you, Michael. So you decided to make a film about all of this, and it's scary stuff. You speak to rape victims, and you show the violence against people trying to engage in free speech, the official governments' cover-ups, etc., etc. This is really scary stuff. So before we get to the facts about the movie, your film, let's talk about the trouble you've been having recently. You were in Canada recently trying to show this film at the Ottawa Public Library, and what happened? And by the way, this isn't Iran or Saudi Arabia. This is Canada. What happened?
Well, I guess about 5 days before the screening was supposed to happen, which was set up by Act for Canada, who had contacted me wanting to screen it in Canada, I found out there was this public protest going on, and apparently, it involves some communist unions and the Antifa and the so-called Ottawa Against Fascism, and more importantly, this so-called human rights lawyer, Richard Warman, and he sent a few letters, and initially, I guess it was viewed by the police, and they had cleared it for not being hate speech. But then, this public pressure by all these, in essence were communist and left-wing groups, they were successful in putting enough pressure on the library to shut it down. And then the library went out and said that yes, this was hate speech and not according to the guidelines of the library.
Okay, and then Act for Canada, of course, led by Superwoman Valerie Price. She is a true hero of our modern times, and she stepped in and ended up making sure that this film was shown in Toronto, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so, Michael, it's very interesting that these anti-fascists are trying to stop this film, and they succeed in this film not being shown. But it turns out that who are the real fascists really if your film can't be showed?
Well, exactly. I think that one of the, there's the classical definition of fascism, and then there's the definition we think of in modern days, and we'll just stick to the modern definition is that whoever wants to control everything, authoritarian is the word that comes to mind. And this is where surely it is ironic that these so-called anti-fascists want to control what people can and cannot hear. I mean, that's the definition of totalitarianism. You know what I mean? They want to control the public square because they want to be the filter between the so-called dangerous thoughts and then the people, because evidently they have become they're the self-proclaimed judges of what people can and cannot hear. I don't know what to say. It's very. I keep going back to George Orwell because I don't know what else to compare it to. Maybe Soviet Russia.
Right. It's crazy, Michael, because I watched the film. I don't see any quote-unquote hate speech in there. I mean, we're used to it. I mean, Annie, the producer of this show, engaging in activism against honor killings and acid attacks and child marriage and all the vicious crimes under Sharia. And, she's being accused of hate speech by the left. I'm accused of hate speech all the time, and we're concerned about human rights. Your film just basically concerned about human rights. So what does hate speech mean today? Does it mean if you disagree with the left and with Islam, it means that you're engaged in hate speech? Is that the new definition of hate speech?
In essence, yes, and I think in many ways, you know, that truth is hate speech now. I think it's interesting that they want to deplatform this movie, because the only thing I really did with this movie, as you stated, was I gave a microphone to rape victims and their families. And one of the things that I also bring light to is the famous case of Naz Mahmoud, the Kurdish girl who was gang raped by her own family and strangled with a steel wire. So if giving a voice to the victims of you know, these heinous crimes is hate speech, then you know, we're in a very, very bad place. But I like to bring it to some incidents that, for instance, and I've talked about this in other interviews, that there's a case in Sweden with a politician from the Swedish Democrats. He had brought to light some certain rape statistics, and that would, you know, that showed that people from a certain group were more prone to commit acts of rape than others. And he was taken to court for hate speech in Sweden, and then he brought all the statistics to prove his argument. And yeah, the judge said that in this case the facts weren't relevant, and I think that's one of, it goes back to my movie, that a lot of these people who wanted to ban my movie from Ottawa and I guess basically Canada, they didn't even bother to watch the movie, because they continuously harp on like a few things out of the movie, and then they took it completely out of, they didn't even understand it. And they didn't even bother to watch the movie. And I had a debate with a Canadian journalist, and throughout this whole time I kept asking him, did you watch the movie? And he said no. Then I said, how can you write an article about a movie you didn't even watch? And the same goes to this human rights lawyer, Richard Warman. He didn't watch the movie. He just watched a preview that basically has statements from rape victims and what have you not. And then for them to conclude that that's hate speech, I mean, without even watching it, that's preposterous. That's kind of like going to court and condemning a man without even having to prove it. You know, it's just based on assumptions. But I guess it goes back to then your question is, what is hate speech? Well, apparently hate speech is talking about facts and statistics. And then if somebody interprets that as upsetting, well, then automatically it's hate speech, right?
Right. Michael, also very frightening and a little curious, if that's a word to use, the judge saying that in the case that you brought up, that the facts in this case didn't matter. That's how powerful the left and the Islamic supremacists are today. Just want to get back to one thing to reveal just the horror of so much going on. And I apologize to our viewers that perhaps it's not the most appropriate discussion, quote unquote, for family viewing, but we have to tell the truth in terms of what Islam is perpetrating, and the victims are suffering so much. So Michael, what is this case about the family gang raping this girl?
Well, there's I mean, I don't know how known it is outside of England, but a documentary was made on it called Naz Mahmoud, A Love Story. And Baroness Caroline Cox actually brought me to this story. So Naz Mahmoud was a Kurdish girl, and she was forced, like they usually do. She's forced into a marriage with a guy from within her own community. And basically, like many of these marriages, you know, she lives under horrific conditions where, you know, absolute control over the women. And, you know, she was beaten by her husband and raped by him. And she went to the police, I think, like 5 times, and the police did nothing. And in one of the videos, as you may have seen in the documentary, you know, she basically says that, you know, this guy, if you don't hear from me, this guy, that means I'm dead. She basically predicted her own death. But, you know, she divorced this guy, left him, and, you know, that brought a lot of shame to the family and her community. And what ended up happening was that they kidnapped her because she had been dating the wrong guy, and they gang raped her for several hours, and
Who's
then
they?
I mean
Who's they?
her own family, like her cousins and stuff like that, people like that. And so they gang raped her for hours, and they ultimately strangled her with a steel wire. And there's testimony, and it's in the movie where the one guy was saying something about that they were like stomping on her neck to like quiet her, and she was puking, and you know, she was puking, and they, I mean, it's very graphic, and I mean a horrendous death. And
Yeah.
her biggest crime was dating somebody outside of her own community.
But for all the concern that leftist feminists have and that the left has for women's rights, we haven't heard a word from CNN, from MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, all the leftist feminists, Linda Sarsour. Where are they on this case? It's just a monstrous hypocrisy, Michael.
Well, I mean that's one of the things that I feel that doesn't get talked about enough by a lot of people, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring it into my movie was, you know, some of the women or the people who suffer the most, you know, under some of these draconian, shall we say, Sharia law systems that are also springing up in Europe now. You know, they got about what 78 Sharia courts in England. I mean, that's the women within the communities. You know, Muslim women are the ones that probably suffer the most. I mean, and they're the silent victims because, you know, they have nowhere to go. I mean, because if they go anywhere, that's a death sentence usually.
Yeah, and you show all of this in your film. And Michael, for instance, a Labour MP in the UK, Naz Shah, you know, she shared a message online telling Rotherham sex victims to quote unquote shut their mouths for the sake of diversity. Well, you know, this is feminism for you. They want the rape victims to shut up so they can build their perfect planet.
Well, that's also part of why the whole Rotherham and I guess, you know, all these grooming gangs were allowed to do what they did was because that the rape victim that I interviewed and her two mothers, not her two mothers, one mother and there was another mother there. They explained to me that for the police and the government, what was basically more important was community relations. That was the buzzword, community relations. So any news or facts that would somehow could possibly cause some kind of friction between the different communities had to be kind of brushed under the rug
Right.
for the sake of the greater good.
Right.
You know.
Michael, you're making this film for many reasons, to tell the truth, you know, get everything, you know, the facts out there, this horrifying conquest that's going on by Islamic supremacism. But you're also sending a warning to the United States in terms of what has happened in Europe, correct?
Yeah, I mean, because I've lived in the United States for 15 years now, and you know, there's a lot of things here that I like about this country. You know, I like my First and Second Amendment. So, First and Second Amendment rights. You understand what I'm saying? I think that it's basically the First Amendment rights are really important, and when you see what's going on in Europe. And this is where I want to draw attention to a lot of the, again, draconian hate speech laws that are being implemented, especially in Germany, but at an EU level. I mean, some of these laws, you know, there are segments here in the US who want, you know, more concrete hate speech laws introduced. But not only that, when we also talk about this unlimited migration that you see in Europe, because to me, it's not. I mean, it's already been proven by Frontex reports and so forth that in 2016, 93% of the people who came to Italy weren't even refugees. And so I call it a mass migration, not a refugee crisis.
Yeah.
And when you look at United States, I mean, United States really need to learn from what's happening in Europe on two levels. You know, number one are the governments and their draconian laws, but number two, also the consequences of this unrestricted migration. It's just, I mean, it's plain to see that Europe is in a very bad place now, and it'll get worse. and there are segments in the United States, and here I'm thinking particularly about the Democratic Party and some of the more far leftist elements here, funded by George Soros.
Right.
I mean I made this so Americans can see with their own eyes, and I'm aware of that there are plenty of politicians over here who are calling out these warnings, but I think a lot of people tend to not trust them because they're conservatives or what have you not. And that's my thing is that if you won't trust them, well, then trust, a regular Danish guy who just went around with a camera and filmed where he grew up. I mean, it's, I'm no, and I want to make a point of this. I'm not part of the organization, even though this Toronto newspaper said I was part, or the Antifa against fascism, or what the heck it was. They said I was part of some international syndicate. I mean, they give me much more credit than I really do. I'm just a regular guy.
This is the way that they're slandering and smearing the truth tellers. Also, major credit goes out to you, Michael, because it was very clear in some of those parts of the film, your life was in danger. You had to hide that you had a camera, all those no-go zones. It's just really scary what's happening. We're out of time. Michael, for our viewers who really want to watch this film, what do they do?
They can go on Vimeo.com and rent it, or Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime too. I don't know. Evidently, there's a little bit of a problem with Canada with that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, Vimeo.com is probably the best place to start.
Where did you say?
Vimeo.com.
Vimeo.com. Okay, Killing Europe, Vimeo.com. And Michael, what are your plans in the near future?
I'm gonna try and get this movie screened as many places as I can, but I mean, it's proving to be quite a problem. I can't even screen it in Denmark because no venue will do it because they're too afraid of the problems from Antifa in particular. Yeah,
very scary times. Michael Hansen, thank you for making this film, Killing Europe, that's on Vimeo.com. Thank you for being a truth teller. Keep up the fight.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank the godmother of the Glazov Gang in Canada, Valerie Price, for making this program possible and for contacting, allowing, and helping the Glazov Gang contact this heroic filmmaker, Michael Hansen. Valerie, thank you very much. We'll see you on the next Glazov Gang. Good night.